This is the story of Julian Ashford and his wife Rebecca Ashford. They had built something real together, a house with good light in the mornings, a marriage that had survived 2 miscarriages and 1 relocation and the quiet erosion that follows any life lived in close quarters for long enough. Julian was the kind of man who noticed small things, the way Rebecca held her coffee cup with both hands even in summer, the particular silence she kept when something was troubling her that she hadn't yet decided to share. He had always believed that noticing was a form of love. What he hadn't considered was that some things are hidden not from carelessness, but from fear. And that fear, when it has lived long enough in a person, begins to look exactly like distance. The drive back from her sister's house took 40 minutes on a good evening. And this was a good evening. The kind where the light came in low and amber through the passenger window and Rebecca had her shoes off and 1 foot tucked beneath her on the seat, the way she always sat when she felt comfortable enough to stop performing comfort. Julian had the radio on low, something acoustic, forgettable. He wasn't really listening to it. He was doing the quiet calculus of a Tuesday, whether the Hendricks proposal needed another revision, whether they had anything in the freezer, whether Rebecca had seemed quieter than usual at her sister Dana's, or whether he was projecting again. He did that sometimes. Looked for problems the way other men looked for exits. Dana looks tired, he said. She's always tired. She has 3 kids and a husband who golfs. Rebecca was scrolling through her phone without particular urgency, the blue light catching the underside of her chin. She's fine. I didn't say she wasn't fine. Your tone implied it. He let that pass. Not because he didn't have a response, but because he had learned, somewhere around year 6 of their marriage, that some sentences were doors and some were walls, and it was worth pausing to figure out which one you were walking toward before you took the step. They had been married 9 years. They had met at a conference in Portland. He was in architectural consulting. She was doing marketing for a mid-sized firm that had since been acquired twice over. And there had been, in those early years, a quality to their connection that Julian had never quite found the language for. Not passion exactly, though there had been that. Something more like recognition. The sense that this particular person understood the grammar of how he moved through the world. That feeling had not disappeared entirely. It had just become less frequent, the way a song you love can become background noise if it plays too often. Rebecca put her phone down in her lap and looked out the window. The suburbs thinned, and the highway opened up a little, and Julian merged left without signaling because there was no one else around. You've been somewhere else all evening, she said. Not an accusation. An observation with an edge. I've been right here. Physically. He glanced at her. She wasn't looking at him. Her profile in the amber light was something he had memorized without meaning to. The slight irregularity of her nose. The way her jaw set when she was containing something. Work stuff, he said. Which was partially true. She nodded, which meant she didn't entirely believe him, but wasn't going to press it. They were good at that, both of them. The practiced grace of not pressing. Her phone lit up in her lap. He wasn't trying to look. The notification appeared in his peripheral vision the way all peripheral things do. Without invitation, without context. Just long enough to register before she turned the screen face down with a motion that was nearly casual. Nearly. The name on the notification had been truncated, the way they always are. But the account prefix had been visible for just a moment. Not her name, not anyone he recognized. Something that began with an underscore, the kind of formatting people used when they wanted a name that didn't look like a name. He said nothing. He kept his eyes on the road. He adjusted his grip on the wheel slightly. Outside, a gas station slid past, its lights too bright against the darkening sky. You hungry? He asked. Not really. Maybe something small. There's that Thai place. Sure, she said. Thai is fine. They drove the rest of the way in a silence that sounded, to anyone who didn't know them, like contentment. October arrived the way it always did in their part of the country. Overnight, without negotiation. One morning, the trees were still summer green, and then they weren't, and Julian found himself wearing a jacket on the walk from the car to the office and thinking, not for the first time, that whole seasons of his life had begun passing this way, quietly, without announcement. He had not forgotten the notification. He hadn't obsessed over it either, which was the thing that surprised him most when he allowed himself to examine it. He had filed it somewhere interior and returned to it occasionally. The way you return to a word you're not sure you've spelled correctly. Not panicked, just uncertain. Rebecca had been present that month in ways she sometimes wasn't. She cooked twice in 1 week, which was unusual. She asked about the Hendricks project with what seemed like genuine interest. She laughed at something he said about their neighbor's new car, a laugh that reached her eyes, which was the laugh he'd fallen in love with. And for a moment, it felt possible that the notification had been nothing. A work account, a secondary email, something boring and administrative that she hadn't mentioned because it hadn't occurred to her that it needed mentioning. He wanted to believe that. He noticed that he wanted to believe it, and the noticing made him trust the wanting slightly less. It was a Thursday when he saw the second phone. Not found it, saw it. It was visible for perhaps 4 seconds, sitting between the bathroom vanity and the small decorative basket Rebecca kept her hair things in, before she came into the bedroom and he looked away and she went back into the bathroom. And when he passed the doorway a minute later, it was gone. The kind of object that vanishes when looked for directly, which meant it had been moved, which meant she knew exactly where it was. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the carpet. The room was quiet. From the bathroom came the ordinary sounds of her routine: water running, a drawer opening, the soft percussion of her getting ready for something she'd mentioned and he'd half registered: dinner with a colleague, or a friend from her old firm. He couldn't remember which. This, he thought, is how it happens. Not with a revelation, with the accumulation of small wrongnesses that each have a plausible explanation until the day they don't. He pulled on a clean shirt and came to the doorway of the bathroom. She was leaning close to the mirror, mascara brush in hand, concentration on her face. "Who are you meeting tonight?" he asked. "Kara, I told you. From the Meridian account." She didn't look away from the mirror. "Right." He paused. "How long have you known her?" "I don't know. 3 years? 4? A brief flicker of something. Not guilt. Not quite. Crossed her face and then settled again. "Why?" "Just making conversation." She looked at him then, in the mirror's reflection rather than directly, which gave both of them the small mercy of indirection. Julian. Just his name, delivered in a tone that was not quite warning and not quite tenderness. "Have a good time," he said. He went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water and stood at the window looking at the neighbor's yard. The neighbor had a dog, some large, slow-moving breed, and it was sitting at the edge of the grass, doing nothing in particular. Julian watched it with the peculiar comfort that other creatures' indifference can provide. He thought about what he knew and what he suspected and what the distance was between those two things. He thought about what he would do if the distance turned out to be nothing, and what he would do if it turned out to be everything, later. This was perhaps the 3rd week of October, the Leaves now fully committed to their departure. He was sitting with his colleague and oldest friend, Marcus, at the bar they'd been going to since before either of them had wives or mortgages, or the particular look that men get when they've stopped being surprised by their own sadness. Marcus was talking about his daughter's school situation, a bureaucratic grievance that had already been narrated twice, and would probably be narrated again. Julian was listening, or performing listening with the competence of long practice. "You're not here," Marcus said eventually. "I'm here. Physically." Marcus used the same word Rebecca had used, which Julian noted with a dim, internal amusement. "Work stuff." Marcus studied him. They had been friends long enough that silence had its own grammar between them. "What kind of work stuff?" Julian turned his glass on the bar. "The kind that isn't work stuff." Marcus leaned back and said nothing for a moment. "Then have you talked to her? About what?" "Whatever it is you're not talking to her about." Julian almost smiled. "No." "Why not?" "Because." He stopped, looked at the middle distance. "Because once you say certain things, you can't take them back, and right now I'm still in a place where I don't know what the thing is." Marcus was quiet again. Then, in the odd half-distracted tone of a man following his own thought to its end, You know, people watching this would probably tell you to just ask her directly. I don't know. He glanced briefly to the side, in a way that made Julian follow his gaze to nothing, to empty bar space. Maybe someone out there knows. Maybe like this story or subscribe or something. Julian looked at him. What? Marcus blinked, looked mildly confused himself, as if he'd heard the words leave his mouth and couldn't fully account for them. Nothing. I don't know where that came from. He picked up his drink. Ask her. Yeah, Julian said. He didn't. He found the shell payments by accident, the way most things are found. He wasn't looking through her things. He had been trying to locate the password to a streaming service. They shared an account, and the login had been on a slip of paper she'd left on her desk weeks ago, when the television had been acting up. He was in her home office, which was really the second bedroom that had always been about to become something else. Her desk was its usual managed disorder. Folders and a ceramic mug full of pens and a small cactus she'd bought herself as a joke about self-sufficiency. The browser was open. She'd left a tab. He stood over the desk and read what was on the screen with the focused calm of someone who has been half expecting this and is therefore, paradoxically, less prepared for it than someone who hasn't. It was a transaction history, an account he didn't recognize, under a name that was almost hers. A middle name rearranged, an unfamiliar last name, amounts transferred in amounts small enough to feel considered. 400 here, 300 there, a pattern spanning 7 months. The recipient was a business entity with a name that, when he typed it into a search window on his own phone, returned nothing. No website, no registration. The particular blankness of something that was designed to receive money rather than to exist. He photographed the screen. He wasn't sure why. Evidence felt like the wrong word for it, too legal, too cold. But his hands needed something to do. Rebecca came home 40 minutes later. He was in the kitchen, where he had been standing with a cold cup of tea. And when she came to the door and set down her bag and said hey in the easy way she did, when she expected the evening to be ordinary, he waited until she'd taken off her coat. I went into your office, he said. She looked at him. Something in his voice or his stillness or both. Okay, she said carefully. I wasn't looking for anything. I was looking for the streaming password. He paused. I found something else. The silence in the kitchen was very complete. The refrigerator ran. Outside, a car passed. Julian. Her voice was altered. Not guilty. Not exactly. Frightened, which he hadn't expected. I'm not going to yell at you, he said. And he meant it, not as a performance of control, but as an actual fact about how he felt. He felt, strangely, very tired. I just want to understand what I'm looking at. She sat down at the kitchen table without being invited to sit. She put both hands flat on the surface and looked at them. He had seen her in many emotional states across 9 years, but he had not seen this one before. This posture that was equal parts shame and exhaustion and something older, something that had been in her longer than he'd known her. How much do you know? She asked. Enough. She closed her eyes. There's a person, she said, who has something. From before us. She opened her eyes but kept her gaze on the table. Not what you're thinking. Nothing. A brief pause. Nothing like that. But something I did. Something I'm not. She stopped. Started again. I was 24. It was stupid and it was legal, but it would look a certain way now, in my industry. With the kind of clients I have, Julian didn't move. Someone is blackmailing you. She didn't answer, which was the answer. For how long? 8 months. He exhaled slowly through his nose. The number carried its own weight. 8 months of dinner conversation and weekend drives and ordinary Tuesday evenings, all of it layered over this. Not a lie she had manufactured, but a fear she had managed alone, which was somehow worse, and somehow also not. Why didn't you tell me? She looked at him then. Really looked at him, and in her face he could read something that he recognized, because he'd felt it himself in other contexts, smaller ones. The specific pride of a person who has decided that needing help is a form of failure. Because I thought I could handle it, she said. And then I couldn't. And by the time I couldn't, It had been long enough that telling you meant telling you everything, all at once. She pressed her lips together. I knew what your face would look like. What does my face look like? Like that, she said quietly. He looked away from her, at the window above the sink, at the dark square of night beyond it. Who is it? He said. She told him what she knew, which was not much. A name that was probably not a name. An email address. A routing trail she'd been afraid to investigate too closely because investigation felt like escalation. She had been paying because payment felt like management. She had told herself each month would be the last month. That's not how these things work, Julian said. I know that. Soft, exhausted. I know. He turned back to face her. She looked in the kitchen light like someone who has been very alone for a long time inside a life that didn't appear lonely from the outside. I'm going to sleep in the other room tonight, he said. Not because I'm angry. I am angry, but that's not why. He picked up his cold tea and poured it into the sink. I need to think. She nodded. He got to the doorway and then stopped. Didn't turn around. The second phone, he said. Who does it belong to? It's mine. A prepaid one. For communicating with. She didn't finish the sentence. He nodded. To the doorway rather than to her. Okay, he said, and went to bed in the room that had always been about to become something else. The months that followed were not what either of them would have called separation. Julian did not leave. Rebecca did not ask him to stay. They continued, which is its own category, distinct from thriving and distinct from ending, the long gray corridor of a marriage that has been damaged and not yet diagnosed. He had agreed in that first week to help her. It was not a romantic decision. It was a practical one, made in the way Julian made most decisions, methodically, with an awareness that the alternative was worse. If Rebecca tried to handle it alone, she had already demonstrated what that looked like. If she went to the police, there were complications she'd explained with the careful precision of someone who had been rehearsing the explanation for months. The blackmailer knew things, not crimes, exposures, the kind that end careers and dismantle reputations with the clean efficiency of modern media cycles. Julian had a contact, a friend of a friend, a former investigative journalist named Owen who now did corporate intelligence work and charged accordingly. He didn't explain to Owen why he was asking or what the marriage context was. He provided the name, the email routing, the account information, and let Owen do what Owen did. It took 11 weeks. The blackmailer turned out to be a man named Garrett Foss, 41 years old, who had worked briefly at Rebecca's previous company and had left under circumstances that, when Julian researched them, revealed their own particular ugliness. A termination dispute, a lost arbitration, a grievance that had curdled into something systematic. He had done this before, not to Rebecca specifically, but the methodology was familiar. Find an exposure, make it legible as a threat, collect until the target either paid or stopped being vulnerable. Owen put together documentation, the kind that didn't require Rebecca to expose what she'd done, but made Foss's pattern undeniable. It was delivered to Foss with a letter that Julian did not write. Owen had people for that, and the payments stopped. Julian did not tell Rebecca the details of how it ended. He told her it was over. She believed him, or performed believing him, and for a week she was warmer than she'd been in months. Grateful in a way that expressed itself as attention, as questions about his day, as her hand finding his arm in the evening. He let it happen without pulling toward it or away from it. It was Marcus who said the thing that Julian had been thinking but had not allowed himself to complete. They were at the same bar, the familiar one, and Marcus was on his second drink, which was when he became honest rather than merely sociable. You saved her, Marcus said. How are you? Julian turned his glass. Fine, not a useful answer, no. He paused. I keep thinking about the 8 months. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to, with Marcus. She was scared, Marcus said. I know that. But Julian was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved past the window with its usual indifference. But I was right there, he said, for 8 months. and she decided, not once, but every morning she decided again, that I wasn't the person she could come to. Marcus didn't offer a rebuttal because there wasn't one. Maybe she was right, Julian said, which surprised him as he heard himself say it. Maybe she knew something about me that I didn't. About what I would have done. What do you think you would have done? He thought about his face. The face Rebecca had described in the kitchen. The face he didn't know he was making. Something efficient, he said. Probably. That's not nothing, Marcus said. No, Julian agreed. But it's not everything either. At home, Rebecca was reshaping the narrative in ways she might not have been fully conscious of. He could see the process from the outside, in the way she described the past year to her sister in a phone call he had not been meant to overhear. A hard time at work, a difficult period, they'd been through it and come out the other side. She was not lying exactly. She was selecting. The way people do when the full truth feels too large and too damaging to hold in open air. He didn't correct her. He also didn't add to it. He was working late most evenings now, not from avoidance, but from a genuine concentration that work provided. The clean satisfactions of a structural problem with a structural solution. The Hendricks project had come through. There was a new commission in the city, a renovation of a building he had always admired, and he was spending long mornings working through the spatial logic of it with the focused pleasure of a man who has remembered what he's actually good at. He did not know yet what he was going to do about his marriage. He had not stopped loving Rebecca. That was perhaps the thing he was least prepared for, not the anger which came and went, but the stubborn persistence of knowing her. The way she held her coffee cup, the silence she kept, all of it still present, still familiar, still his, in the most inconvenient sense of that word. He drove home one evening in October, a year almost to the month from the first one, and noticed that the light came in at the same angle as it had then, amber and low, and he thought of her foot tucked under her on the seat. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a moment before going in. They had dinner together on a Saturday in November, the kind of dinner that had become infrequent enough to feel deliberate. Candles not because they were romantic, but because Rebecca had bought them at a market weeks ago, and this was the first time they'd remembered. The food was something she'd made from a recipe she'd been meaning to try. It was good. They talked about the renovation project, about her new client, about a documentary they'd both separately started watching and had apparently reached different points in without mentioning it to the other. It was, from the outside, an ordinary dinner. Julian poured more wine and watched the candle flame and waited to see if they were going to arrive at it or if tonight was going to be another exercise in the practiced grace they'd become so fluent in. Rebecca set down her fork. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Are you still here?" She held his gaze when she said it. "I don't mean in the room." He was quiet for a moment. The candle moved. "I don't know yet," he said. She absorbed that. He watched her absorb it. The slight movement of her jaw, the way her eyes didn't fall even though they wanted to. He had always respected that about her. The way she could hold difficult things without looking away. "That's fair," she said. "Rebecca." He said her name the way she had said his, that night in the kitchen doorway. Not a preface to anything, just the name. "What you went through with Foss. All of it." He paused. "I'm not angry about it anymore. I want you to know that." She waited. "I'm something else," he said. "I'm not sure I have the word for it." "Tell me what it feels like," she said. Quietly, with no performance of casualness. He thought about it honestly. "Like a room I thought I knew the dimensions of, and then I turned around and there was another door. And behind the door there was a year of your life that you lived without me in it." He turned his glass. "I can't unknow the door." "No," she said. "We could." He stopped. "There are things we could do. There are people you can talk to. That we could talk to." He meant a therapist, and they both understood the implication. "Do you want to?" she asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. He looked at her across the table in candlelight. This woman he had driven home in amber evenings and made coffee for and argued with about nothing and loved in the specific way you love someone whose rhythms have become indistinguishable from your own. And he tried to find the answer in himself, with the same honesty he applied to structural problems, looked for where the weight was actually falling. I want to, he said, which was not nothing, but was not the same as yes. Something shifted in her face. Not collapse, not resolution, something subtler. The face of a person who has heard a true thing and is deciding what to build around it. Okay, she said. They finished dinner. She washed the dishes and he dried them, and they stood at the sink together in the particular silence of two people who have said enough for one night. The kind of silence that was a wall, maybe, or a door. He hadn't decided yet. Outside the kitchen window, the November dark was complete and still. The neighbor's dog, that large, slow-moving breed, was somewhere inside its warm house. The street was empty. Julian folded the dish towel and set it on the counter. He thought about the drive home a year ago and the amber light, and the notification he hadn't mentioned, and all the small decisions that had accumulated in the space between noticing and saying, his own silence and hers, the doors they had both stood before and chosen not to open, for different reasons and with different costs. He thought about what Marcus had said. Maybe she knew something about you. He thought about his face, the efficient face, the face that solved things. He turned and looked at Rebecca, who was drying her hands on a second towel and not looking at him. And he understood something that he hadn't had language for before, that he had loved her in the way that he was good at loving, attentively, reliably, from a slight distance that he had always told himself was respect, and that she had needed, at some point, something he hadn't known to offer, not because he didn't have it, but because neither of them had ever asked. He wasn't sure that knowledge changed anything. He wasn't sure it didn't. I'm going to read for a while, he said. Okay, she said. He went to the living room and picked up the book he'd been working through for 2 weeks. He didn't open it immediately. He sat in the chair by the lamp and held it in his hands and looked at the middle distance, at nothing, at the quiet geometry of the room he had lived in for 6 years. Down the hall, the water ran briefly. A light went off. He opened the book. Outside, the first snow of November had begun to fall. Quietly, without announcement, the way the seasons had always changed in this part of the country. By morning, it would be gone, but for now it was there, settling on the dark grass and the empty street, covering everything it touched in something that was almost white, almost clean, and would not last. He read until the lamp was the only light left in the house.